So now we've got Jesse McLean. Currently serves as manager of Bandera Corridor Conservation Bank. He's a natural resources consultant in Central Texas and has consulted on several conservation banking projects for the benefit of golden cheek warbler and black-capped vireo.
All right, thank you. It's good to see all of you guys, and especially talk about conservation and management of Ashe Juniper among friends. My talk is going to be somewhat of a rambling talk. It's going to be a 30,000 foot level. I'm trying to ride and stand on the shoulders of giants here. What I do has been a long time in the making. And so what I hope to demonstrate is, just where we are in landscape. So I'm a conservation banker. What does that mean? I bank acres for golden cheek warbler, species banking. It's not the same as mitigation banking. Mitigation banking in Texas means streams and wetlands, and that it's overseen by the Corps of Engineers. My program is overseen by the Fish and Wildlife Service at the federal level. So what is being banked? Well, it varies depending on what you are. I'm a conservation bank focused exclusively on conservation and preservation of habitat for a golden cheek warbler. Now, our mitigation and conservation banks the same as habitat exchanges? Somewhat. Habitat exchanges may be a little bit more flexible in that they are voluntary, they're voluntary markets of novel and emergent conservation commodities. So there again, we have that nexus of the economic transaction. How can we get conservation with compensation? So what's the added value of having a conservation bank? Well, we have certainty. If you're in the development community and you interface with the regulatory or the regulator, you want to know that you have a certain outcome. And so we're available. We're ready-made credits. It's basically you come to the window, you tell us how many credits you need, we give them to you. Scale. We're allowed to work at a landscape scale rather than site by site. It avoids that postage stamp kind of fragmented conservation. Time, so there again, where you're interfacing with the regulator or the regulator, if you were to do what's called permittee responsible mitigation, not only do you have to consult to get to the point of knowing how much offset you need, then you have to go find your site. And they have to review and approve that. So we're already reviewed, we're already approved, we have credits released and available. Cuts down that back end time. Economic, so it's an economic market-based solution. And so the federal government, Fish and Wildlife, is responsible for creating our market. I don't have a horizon. I can't ever predict when my next credit sale is going to come in. Compliance with the Endangered Species Act is supposedly voluntary. And so I rely on federal projects or quasi-federal projects or good corporate citizens to come in. So what facilitated creation of Bandera Corridor was back in 2005, the state legislature mandated connection of the wind energy in West Texas to the urban centers in the eastern half of the state. So that's going to cross the Balcones Escarpment in the hill country. It's going to require thousands of acres of offset. I worked at the time for a land planning firm here in Austin. They had a portfolio of clients that had thousands of acres and they were conservation minded. And so this was, the emergent solution. Camp Bullis was another initial customer of ours as they worked to protect the surrounding area of Camp Bullis. They were the customer that launched our first credit sale. They purchased 300 credits. And then you have the regional habitat conservation plans in Bexar County and Comal County. So how do we distill a focal area? You know, I thought this was an apt picture because we're talking about Juniper. And during Prohibition, I know there were some illegal stills somewhere. So here's the map I work with. It's the 35 county range of the golden cheek warbler. It's broken down based on a 1992 recovery plan into 8 regions. And then based on whatever map you're using that particular day, this area always stands out. It always has good connectivity and low fragmentation. So here's where my bank is located. And then as you saw Becky present earlier, here's Love Creek Preserve. Here's the 55,000 acre Bandera Canyonlands ecoregion. And then all these purple properties are mandated to manage for golden cheek warbler in one way or another. These aqua properties are the Edwards Aquifer Protection Program out of the city of San Antonio. That's a state, hill country state natural area, Garner State Park, Lost Maples, voluntary conservation by a private landowner, voluntary conservation by a private landowner. Here's that area standing out once again. And this was a map that Rachel Lindsay showed earlier today. So, as many people have demonstrated by now, here's what it looked like in the 50s when we first had aerial imagery available. Very degraded, you know. The idea is I'm coming from the Appalachians. This is what's left over available acreage. And so how do I improve it? How do I make a living from it? The first thing I have to do is cut the trees to grow the grass, to grow the livestock. Here's what it looks like now. And so all my sites are recovering woodland in one way or another. So they still have quite a bit of diversity in pockets on them. I like to go out in the field with Jason Singhurst. He gets really excited on some of my properties. And so that gets me excited. When I can excite somebody like Jason Singhurst, I know I'm doing something right. So here's the here's the past prehistory of some sites. And then there's the community aspect. What's the context that we're within? So I think Becky and somebody else mentioned the Bandera Canyonlands Alliance. That, I'd like to, you know, acknowledge this, but Bandera Canyonlands Alliance was formed from an idea between David Wolf, Burl Armstrong, and a landowner. And so Becky showed that picture of a room full of people. Well, 20 years ago, it was just 3. A lot of what I do is in the corridor called the Twisted Sisters. It's considered one of the most scenic drives in the hill country, if not the state. So we get a lot of motorcycles, a lot of car enthusiasts coming through on a regular basis. Tourism is a big economic driver of Bandera. Of course, you have to consider the land trends. Everything's becoming more fragmented. Everybody wants their piece of the hill country. You know, give me 5 acres, give me 10 acres, 25 acres. And then you have cost sharing programs that might be available to landowners that, as Becky pointed out, make sure you know what's in the deliverable of the project. It may not align with your conservation goal. So this is some of the scenic corridor that we've been able to protect is an auxiliary component. It's a secondary benefit to what we're doing, protecting golden cheek warbler habitat. So all you can see there is under easement. So understanding the landowner's narrative. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the site, but sometimes the story is that's the that's the way you do it, back here needs some work. I see it the other way. That's what I want. This already had the work done. We need to recover it. So 6 degrees of separation. What does a cedar chopper, the original location of Chewy's on Barton Springs Road, and Michael Levy, the founder of Texas Monthly, have to do? My first name, Jesse, comes from Jesse Emmett Teague. His family lived out in the area by Davenport Ranch, which is where like St. Stephen's School is now. And back in the early 20s, 30s, 40s, when this building right here was the edge of town, you know. And so that was my great-great-grandfather's service station. You know, he had gas and grocery right there. And then Michael Levy. My mother was the office manager for Michael Levy when he founded Texas Monthly. And so my middle name is Michael. Somehow he wound up in the delivery room when I was being born. So what's his connection to this discussion? Well, back in 2009, he is a big proponent of paying attention to that urban wildland interface. He was very concerned about the fire aspect of it, and that it might start on Brightleaf Preserve and then end up somewhere over on 183. So adjacent landowners, just some of the different treatments that you see on private property may not always be appropriate. So this actually can appear as suitable golden cheek warbler habitat on a desktop analysis. But you have to make a site visit to make sure that it actually is suitable. Past land use history, we're not the first ones to be here. That it looks like it has an Ashe juniper growing out of it, but it's not, it's behind it. This is a homestead site. This was their outhouse, which must have been a luxury because it has 2 seats. And this is where that bulldozer stopped. You know, it got tired. It must have been working on this guy's land. So this is adjacent, immediately to the west from my project. And, you know, from wherever this guy's been getting his education, this is the appropriate treatment of the hill country in that area. I do have to commend him. He does have grass on those slopes, which was surprising to me. Here's another landowner. His idea of increasing diversity within the canyonlands is sending 2 guys out in a chainsaw, 2 guys with chainsaws every day to cut as much Ashe juniper as they can. They stack it up in these brush terraces, and because it's so steep, they're about 10 yards apart, if not less. And then here's a voluntary treatment. You know, Jim just showed stuff that we're trying to recover and restore. You know, he's putting in terraces. Well, these guys cut down Ashe juniper to put in these terraces. This is the type of landowner I want to talk to. You know, he's using and enjoying his property, you know, with, you know, suitable golden cheek warbler habitat that's more than likely occupied. If I come in and roll him in my conservation bank, I'm not going to affect his use and enjoyment of that property. So essentially where I am is it's like what tool in the toolbox is available. And that happened to be conservation banking. That was the lever we used. So within that, you have to have a management plan. And I don't know if any of you have had the experience of interacting with a regulatory side of an agency, but the discussion they had yesterday with somebody that you might have overheard doesn't apply to you tomorrow. And so we had to pick something that we could stick in our easement to guide landowners. And so we picked the 2003 endangered species book by Linda Campbell. So within that, there's 3 tiers of habitat, you know, highly likely to occur, maybe used, not likely to occur. And then here's the caveat, unless adjacent to occupied habitat. And so what this was used to be known as is the no-take guidelines. And USDA would rely on this. They had a biological opinion with Fish and Wildlife Service where they utilize these categories, but they left this part off. And so that puts all of this on the menu. And so within that guidance, it says linear openings no wider than 16 feet, and that's to create this canopy cover, if possible. This is in a maple canyon during the winter, so there's no leaf cover, but there is a road that goes right there. And then this is Ashe Juniper under 15 feet tall. This is Ashe Juniper under 4-inch diameter at breast height. So if you just read the guidance, you know, without the caveat, unless adjacent to occupied habitat, that's all gone. So I don't know if I have time for questions, do I?
Yeah, I think you have time for a question. Anybody have a question? Yep, go ahead.
Go ahead.
What do landowners get in exchange for purchasing a conservation credit?
So the landowner doesn't purchase the conservation credit, they create it.
Okay.
And then they enroll their property into my bank, and we basically profit share with them. So we cover all the setup costs, all the due diligence of enrolling the property, and then providing the financial assurances for the monitoring and maintenance of that property going forward from our share of the proceeds. And then the landowner, you know, realizes actual cash rather than a tax credit or something like that. And then these particular landowners are independently wealthy. They're reaching estate planning horizons on their property. And so they use and enjoy their property like this, and they want to make sure future generations have that opportunity. So they enroll it in my bank. I go sell the credit. They take the money and they put it into an endowment for the property to carry forward.
So you sell the credit?
I sell the credits.
Okay.
Yeah.
To who?
Developers. So that's one thing I wanted to do. I meant to do this at the start, but how many people in here are landowners just wanting to learn something? So a good number. And then how many in here are regulators with the Fish and Wildlife Service? I see one. So that's few. And then how many are developers? Well, John Marsh is raising his hand, but he works for TxDOT, so that's unfair. He's a customer because he has to comply with the Endangered Species Act. There's no private developer in the room, right? And so I make the connection between the landowner, the regulator, and the developer. So, yeah.
All right, great talk. Thank you very much.